Nick, you're the last one to close it here. We've had a wonderful day. If you ask me, it seems others are enjoying it. They're at least sticking around. So the floor is yours. Thank you for being here.
Paul, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. I hope you're having a great day wherever you are in the world. Currently, I live in the UK. I live in London, although I work for a French company. I'll be going to Paris tomorrow to work for a week. And in this talk, I'll be talking about modernization and I'll be sharing some of my recent experiences working at this French company. If I'm able to share my screen, I think I know how to do this. Yeah, there we go.
Yep, we see
Just
it.
need to just need to reorganize my screen a little bit. All right, there we go. All good. Uh, okay, so basically, we are all often involved in these modernization projects. Doesn't matter what our role is in the company, it has an impact on us in some way, whether we're someone who works more in engineering, in architecture, in products, um, senior leadership. We have these old software systems that are causing us problems or stopping us from achieving things that we'd like to achieve. And we have lots of technical problems that we have to overcome to make our old systems modern and shiny and easy to work with so we can build new features very easily. And at the same time, to modernize effectively, we also have lots of hard organizational problems. So I'll give some examples of what I'm talking about, and then I'll dig into three of the topics and give some examples of the work I've been doing over the past year or so. So talking about organizational challenges, one of the first topics is around balancing work. What do we work on? Very often we don't just stop stop everything, stop building new features and fix our old systems. Very often it takes a long time to modernize our old systems. And we have different teams and different departments who are all modernizing together. And so there's often a tension and a conflict around what kind of work do we work on? Do we do modernization work this sprint? Or do we build some new features this sprint? Or do we do 50-50? And depending on who you speak to in the company, there will be different opinions about what the right thing is. People on the tech side might feel like we're not getting enough time to work on modernization work. People on the product side might feel like, oh, these tech people are doing all this modernization work and we haven't added any new feature to the product in weeks or months. The tech people have taken over. We need to get our control back. Another example of a very difficult and challenging aspect of modernization is dealing with things when they break. And things break a lot in modernization. The goal of a modernization is obviously to have modern systems that are stable and don't break, but the journey to get there involves usually a lot of things breaking because you start building new bits of software, but they have to talk to the old bits of software. And when you combine all of these new and old pieces, trying to work in new and old ways, things tend to break all the time. You have different databases and data stores, which all have a different perspective of the reality of the world. And for these reasons, lots of things can break. And so if you don't have good processes, good culture, good social structures and support networks in the company, when these technical problems happen, your company just won't be able to deal with it, and your modernization will be very painful and very stressful. People probably get fired, and it probably won't last very long either. So that's definitely a very big problem. Another big problem on the organizational side is the fact that people usually aren't prepared to do modernization work. If you're working in a company with legacy systems and you've been working that way for a long time, and your company decides, oh, now we need to modernize our legacy systems, a lot of the people won't have the experience of having knowing how to do that. That's not how they've been working for the last year, 2 years, maybe 5 years or even more. So you need to be able to support people on this journey so that they have the skills needed to modernize. And if you don't, this will also almost certainly cause in either your modernization will fail, or because people don't have the knowledge and expertise, you will build a new system that's maybe even worse than the old system. So making sure people have the support they need as they're modernizing, very important organizational challenge. And then there's also ways of working. This can be a huge problem when you're modernizing, because when you modernize your old systems, it gives you opportunities to be more agile, for example, to be able to deploy software more frequently, to benefit from modern infrastructure. But if you have ways of working that prevent you from taking advantage of that, you're not going to get the best of modernization, and it might even block your modernization. For example, if you have very strict criteria of all the things that must be done and manually verified before software can be deployed, that can be a huge problem. Obviously, another challenge of modernization, as you're probably aware, a lot of these challenges are common whether you're modernizing or not, but they're definitely very big problems when you are modernizing. And obviously, dependencies is something that we all have to deal with all the time. And especially when modernizing, the dependencies can be of a different nature when modernizing, because what can be interesting when you're modernizing is you have different teams that all want to modernize at the same time. And so the dependencies are related to the actual modernization work as well. Let's say we'll have an example of this one later, I think. But team A wants to modernize, but they can't modernize until team B's modernized part of their system. So the kind of dependencies you get in modernization are similar to normal, but they're different. They have different nuances. And that's another big challenge. How do you manage those organizational dependencies when you're modernizing? Another organizational challenge is at what level and at what time to globalize. When do we decide this is a problem that should be solved in one team, or when do we decide this is a problem that we should solve at a department level or a company level, and something that multiple teams should all be using or applying in a similar way? When you're modernizing, you're on this journey of it's a journey of discovery. You're trying to understand what would our systems look like in a modern environment with modern technologies. And as you're learning, you can't always predict how things will work out. And so it's very difficult to decide up front what decision should be local and what decision should be global. And very often you want to start with a local solution. And when one or two teams have established some effective pattern or process or technology, you then decide, okay, this actually we can see how clearly this works. It would make sense to do this in the rest of the organization. So there's a time component to that one as well. Another organizational challenge, which is always there, but is again with modernization, it has a lot of nuances and it can be very difficult, is how do you work out how effective teams are modernizing? How do you actually decide team A is doing an amazing job and team B is doing an awful job? Team B might be doing an amazing job, but they might have so much legacy and so much more difficulties than team A. It just looks like they're doing a worse job. And so if we try to naively compare and measure teams' progress based on some simple or obvious signs, we can cause bad incentives, and that can cause some big organizational problems. So the kind of how we measure and incentivize teams has a huge impact. So those are some examples. I won't have time to talk about all of those examples, so I picked out three which were quite fresh in my mind, things I'd worked on recently and things I thought I might be able to go into like some real details and fresh experiences. And also with the questions at the end, I can go into some more details about these. So when I looked around at PayFit and I looked at some of the interesting stories, I thought this acquisition of skills is something that's quite interesting at PayFit. I'll talk a bit more about that shortly. But like I was mentioning earlier, the key concept here is if you've got a team of 50, 100, 200 developers, and they've all been working in this legacy system for a number of years, their mindset is going to be, and their skill set. You've hired people who want to work in that way, or who are happy to work in that way, or who have the skills to work in that way. And now you're asking them to rebuild something with a completely different approach using tools they haven't used before and potentially ways of working that they haven't used before. If you just say, right, just start building a new system without any effort of upskilling and training, then that's almost certainly, well, I would say certainly, unless you've hired really super smart people who've all done this before, I would say that would be a very risky and almost inevitably failing strategy. Um, so at PayFit, I think there were some interesting approaches that are being taken to address this problem of how can we make sure that people in all teams across the whole company have the skills they need to modernize effectively based on what we're trying to achieve at PayFit, based on the principles and the approaches and the guidelines we've set out for the transformation work. And one of those skills is DDD, domain-driven design. I'll talk about that shortly. But the really simple why here is, PayFit has some old systems, whether we call them legacy or however we describe them, they're a number of years old. They're currently, I wouldn't say, it's awful software. I would just say the business is growing and the old systems aren't able to allow the company to grow as quickly now as it did before. And so PayFit wants to achieve teams that can work more independently, have a more loosely coupled software system. And one of the approaches or one of the philosophies that PayFit has taken is to use domain-driven design, an approach to building and designing software systems, which involves collaboration between software developers and architects with product experts, domain experts, business experts, to try and create a view of the company that breaks a company down into domains and to have software architecture aligned to these domains. So it's kind of like, how do you describe the different parts of your business, these different areas, like sales and marketing, etc. And some that will be more specific to your industry. And then how do we align our teams and our software around these domains so they can work more independently and allow the company to grow? So if you're on this journey, there's different approaches you can take to upskilling and supporting your teams. The first one is you can just send them on a 2-day training course. I've taught a lot of 2-day TTD training courses, and they can be very useful, but that's not going to be enough. In my experience, when you're trying to introduce new skills, new ways of working, new ideas, new approaches in your company, it takes a lot of perseverance for people to really grasp these ideas. I think it takes a lot of time for people to accept that these are good ideas. You've got to really show people with evidence that this is something worth learning, not just some trend. And then once people have bought into the idea, they need to learn it and apply it and keep applying it. And so at PayFit, we take this approach. How can we have continuous ongoing learning opportunities for everyone in the company to learn this new skills of domain-driven design? And so this is where my colleague Christina enters the picture. Christina has been working at I've been at PayFit for 1 year. She's been at like 3 years. And when she first joined PayFit, she recognized this problem, and that was one of her main jobs. How can she help upskill PayFit as a whole company and make sure all teams have access to domain-driven design training opportunities, opportunities to apply them at work on real projects? And so Christina experimented with some approaches. And what she found was having this regular open hours every Monday. So every Monday, I have in my calendar 1.5 hours every Monday for DDD open hours. And this is open to anyone in the whole company, and not just developers. We have product people, domain experts, people from different countries. You can bring any topic you want to. It could be we're about to start a new project and we want some help mapping out the business processes and shaping our architecture and teams. It could be we've got this current problem, we're not sure where to go with it, let's spend some time exploring it. It could be some specific skills, some specific technical skills, like how to design certain aspects in software. And I would say what makes this successful is that Christina and DDD experts are there every week to provide guidance and support. And I think what really makes this successful is that Christina and I support in this as well, and we have other people, that we actually go out and we look for people who can benefit from this, who might not be aware of this. Because if you've not done DDD before and you don't really understand the concepts, You might not even realize that this open hours is relevant to what you're working on, or you might be a bit nervous that, oh, I'm not sure if my topic's good for that, or I've never done it before, I'm nervous. So, yeah, we have people like Christina and myself embedded in different teams across the company, and we look for opportunities and we say to people, hey, this would be a great topic for DDD open hours on Monday. Let's bring this on next Monday or the Monday after. And I think it's really successful. We always get different audiences each week. Sometimes we get busy weeks, sometimes it's quiet, but we have a lot of great sessions. And I think it just keeps that heartbeat going. There's always chances to, and people can come to these workshops and just watch. You might be in department A, and it might be a workshop about department D or department E. You can just see what they're doing in their domain. So lots of chances to see and apply these concepts yourself and see how others are applying it. So I've got a couple of examples for you here to try and make it a bit more concrete. This was one of the DDD open hours I was involved in sometime last year. So the basic idea is we have in the old system, legacy system, however we want to describe it, trying to be respectful. In the old system, there are business processes that allow the product to function as it currently does. But those business processes can be a bit vague at times. Some of the wording doesn't quite match up with the reality. Some features have been built in a way that they use the system in a way that it wasn't really designed for. These things happen over time. And so in this example here, Team A, as part of their modernization objective, I work in Team A, but not the same Team A as other slides in this Team A. And we have this objective where we have to provide some events from our part of the system. And these events will enable other teams to build their own data stores, databases, without touching the legacy system. So we're upstream of them here. Before they can modernize, we have to modernize. And before we can modernize, we need to decide how should the business work? How do we describe these concepts in our domain? So we had this open hours where we mapped out the current life cycles of these different entities. In Payfit, it's about Payfit's. I didn't really explain this, but Payfit's a company about payroll. So you have all your employees and the departments they work in and their salaries and their contracts. So you can kind of guess what entities might be going on here. And we had this DDD open hours with Team B and some other teams that needed to consume these events. And we worked together to map out these life cycles. This was just a starting point, but we made a lot of great progress. You can see these different phases, draft, ready, active. And you can see at the bottom, we have onboarding, offboarding. So this is an example of where we use the open hours for something very concrete and project related and modernization related. It was a chance for people to use these techniques here, like event storming that they haven't used before. It was a chance for developers to work more closely with product people and domain experts. Another principle of DDD that wasn't always easy to apply sometimes in the past. I've got another example, which is a bit more technical. Need a quick drink first. So this one was an example of where we talked about some technical concepts. Some of the teams at Payfit are using event sourcing and CQRS, a technical pattern, but they don't have experience with this. So we use the open hours as a way to just go over this topic, a way to introduce it, have an open Q&A. So it's very different to the other open hours topic. And this is kind of point I was making. These open hours can go in different directions. And as I was saying, I think what's important is you have people who are going around the company seeing these discussions or challenges happening and saying, look, we have this 1.5 hours open hours every Monday, a chance to learn and apply these concepts. Let's talk about this then. You don't have to say, oh, this would be a great topic. Let's discuss it at some point in the future. You have that slot in your calendar every week that can be used for these topics, and you have experts who will be there. But that's not the only thing we do in terms of learning and upskilling. So two of my colleagues, Nelson and Thibaut, they are doing more hands-on software development sessions, live coding mobbing, where people can bring a topic. We have an internal DDD blog where we try to share experiences and concepts. obviously a Slack channel. We have the company engineering strategy that outlines these key principles. And I think at PayFit, the staff engineering community who are working across the company, it's part of their job as well to look for these opportunities. So to summarize this session, I would say if you want to deal successfully with some of the organizational challenges of architecture modernization, then you need to ask yourself, who are your Christinas? So who are the people in your company who will be providing continuous learning and chances to apply the concepts that you have decided are important to your modernization? It might not be DDD, it might be something else. But if you're saying learning or applying this topic or this concept is important, who are the people who will be there every week making sure that this concept is being applied and learned in your company and everyone has access to it? All right, let's talk about the second topic. And I think this topic is super interesting. Always a very difficult topic, I think. And this one's about decision making. So when you're modernizing, there are lots of decisions to make, and there are lots of options because when you have your old system and your new system, and you have to think how do you have to shape what could the new system be, and then you have to decide how do we get from the old system to the new system? How do we do all this in parallel with ongoing feature work, with many teams involved? That's a lot of decisions, a lot of opinions, and a lot of chances to just get stuck going nowhere because you can't agree on things. So here are some of the common problems I see a lot in this case. So team B hasn't decided yet. So team A will build a tactical solution whilst they're waiting for team B to provide a clear direction on which way the company's going. And the problem here is these tactical solutions last a very long time and actually create more complexity. And it also, I noticed that when teams start building these tactical solutions, they feel like this modernization is not really going anywhere. We're supposed to be fixing our legacy systems, but we're still building these shortcuts and workarounds and hacks and not doing the real work. So indecision can lead to these tactical solutions that add more complexity. People lose confidence and you don't actually modernize. As I talked about earlier, another example is where modernization in one team depends on another team. So here, this team is waiting for team V to build the new API and publish the new events, but team V might be blocked because they don't know how to build those events. That was kind of the situation with the open hours I talked about. We use the open hours to like get this topic moving. It wasn't a blocker yet, but we knew that it would be in a few months. So we've got to try and figure out what are all of the things stopping us building this API and these new events. Okay, let's start trying to get those decisions made. And it doesn't mean we just have to rush to making a decision. It means we need to make a plan and have a process of getting from where we are now to a decision. Yeah, here's another one when it involves many teams. So team B has a problem based on the data they're getting from legacy system, let's say. No, team A has the problem because of team B's data. And team B says, we know how to solve the problem, but we need team C, D, E, and F to agree on our proposed solution. And team C has other priorities, so they can't work on it. This one actually happens very often. It's very difficult to solve. I'm not going to be able to answer all those questions today, but I always happy to try my best afterwards. So I'll talk about one very specific thing we did at PayFit in as much detail as I can right now. So defining this target model so all teams can progress effectively. So basically the idea at PayFit, as I talked about, is to have these independent teams aligned to independent business areas and having software aligned to those business areas. And these different bits of the system would communicate via events. So let's say team A publishes an event saying, this employee has joined the company. Other domains need to know about this employee joining the company. But to get there, we have to think about the challenges of the current system. So if we look at the old system, then we can see that there are different words for describing the same concept. At PayFit, we have words like employee, individual, user, collaborator. Do these things all mean the same thing or do they mean different things? We need to clarify those. Another one is around the relationships. So we have one entity and another entity. Is that a one-to-one relationship, a one-to-many relationship? Depending on who you talk to, it's different things. So we have to make a decision about how this should work in the future. And then there are concepts that don't really exist in by any name. They've been built into the old system in a hack. Let's not say a hacky way, but they're not very clear. And when we design a new system, we want to make these new concepts clearer and more explicit so people understand what we're talking about. So with Christina, she's in this story as well. Christina's involved in a lot of my work at PayFit. She's involved in everything at PayFit, to be honest. She's everywhere. Like whenever there's a problem, she's always jumping in. But basically, what we did here is you can see, I think there's 3 or 4 domains represented here. But we had a part of the system where there were 5 or 6 teams, 5 or 6 domains, and we had a lot of these questions about what's the right name for something. So in this example, I've taken away some of the details. But if you look at domain A, we have the concept of a member. And if you look at the other domain to the right, currently X target Y, you'll see a worker. And so someone might say, if I'm doing something in my code and I see a member ID, can I assume that there was always only one worker ID associated to that member? Or is it possible that when I have a member ID, there could be multiple workers? Because a member to me is one physical person. Is it possible that the same physical person could be represented by 2 workers in the system? What if they work for 2 different companies or 2 different branches of the same overall company? And then we ask about a user. How does a logged in user with their user ID relate to a worker ID? Can I always assume that the logged in user has one corresponding worker, or could there be multiple workers all logging in from the same user account, the same person with different worker profiles? So we had a lot of these questions. We had a lot of people with a lot of opinions, and it looks very simple now, but we had to go through a process because this was blocking the journey for a number of these teams. Team A couldn't build APIs and events until we clarified these relationships and naming concepts. So we knew that was some big decisions there. We knew that was blocking people. And so we decided to create this map. And the way we created this map was, so the map is the output, right? The map isn't the useful thing here. The map just clarifies how we work together moving forward. So if you're working in domain A or domain Y or some of the other domains, then you know that this map is a guideline for what to expect from other teams and how you implement things on your side. So we can agree to these relationships and conventions. But getting here was probably the more interesting part. So I think I covered this on the next slide actually. Yeah, so what we did is we had each team was thinking about their local domain. How do we think these concepts should be represented? We then had DDD open hours sessions where we discuss some of the current problems. So we have issues that cause customers to call into PayFit and say, I can't do this or I can't do that. And we have to figure out, in order to solve this problem, we need to agree on this model of how we implement these things that span across different domains. So we used DDD open hours to discuss some of the current problems. And then we used RFCs. So with the RFC, we proposed a model. And at PayFit, I think there's a good RFC culture, to be honest. Anyone can create an RFC, and then the whole company will read it and provide some feedback. Not everybody agrees on the RFCs. You get a lot of different opinions. It's not like you create the RFC and you get perfect feedback. You still get a lot of conflict and people disagreeing. But the RFC is giving people a chance to share their feedback. And then myself and Christina and some of the others, based on that feedback, we then created an ADR. We designed that map to say, this is what's been agreed upon. And we created an ADR for the technical details, for the event schemas and the APIs that were based on this model. So I think those were the main steps we took. I think there were on a personal level, I think as we went through this process and we seemed to make decisions, people would want to go back and like go back to old decisions and say, but what about this? And I think one of the important things as a facilitator of the decision-making process is that you need to be firm sometimes and say, look, we've discussed this. We had 3 workshops. We made a choice on it. We've had the RFC. We've, we've given this topic enough time, and now we're moving forward with this approach. Otherwise, we just go back in the same loop again. Staff engineering community helped a lot with this, as we had staff engineers in different tribes in the company, and we raised awareness of this model in key meetings. We have regular like all hands meetings for tech teams and stuff, and we shared the model just to make people aware of it and clear of it, just to make sure everyone had a chance to see it and share their feedback on it. And just to be clear, what we were doing here is we weren't trying to design this enterprise architecture model of the whole system in like 10 levels of detail, level 1 capabilities, level 2 capabilities. We weren't doing that. What we were trying to do here is to define enough of the model, enough of the concepts and the relationships that span across multiple teams so that those teams could work confidently and implement features and build APIs that they knew other teams could interact with and wouldn't break things on their side. So, the key here was we were trying to do just enough here to unblock things and not create a model of the whole company, which can happen in sometimes. So I would say to finish this section, who are your decision facilitators? Going to be a lot of decisions to make, a lot of complexity, a lot of conflict around which direction to take. I think it's always good to think to yourself, who are the people in my company who are going to find these decisions that need to be made? Find them early before they become a blocker. Who is then going to facilitate the process of making a decision? Who will identify the workshops that need to happen? Who will write the RFCs? Who will make the final decision? I think you really need to have a good decision-making framework, not necessarily something that's written down, but you need to have a good, solid structure in place for making decisions, I think, to modernize well. And then, yeah, who are the people who can do that and will do that and know it's their job to do that? I think making that clear is super important. All right, so the final topic, I'll talk a bit about this global versus local thing. Always comes up a lot, and it's always a super interesting and difficult topic. I think it's always very easy to go one way or the other. Let's look at some of the problems first. So the first problem I see a lot is, we have 4 different tech stacks for building applications outside the legacy. The infrastructure team cannot support this. It's just too much. They're burnt out trying to keep up. You have 4 different tech stacks. That's a lot of cognitive load to manage. Another problem is multiple teams reinventing the wheel. So we're doing event-driven architecture. Let's build some libraries and tooling to make it easy. And then team B does the same and team C does the same. And then you end up having 5, 10, 20 different ways of doing the same thing, which is a waste of time. And it can cause problems as you have to integrate these different ways of doing the same thing. And I think it's always good to try and think about the extremes and not be too biased about one way or the other. If you just say to every team, you can solve any problem you want, however you want, you risk duplication and this a huge maintenance effort, having all this diversity. But you can also go the other way as well and have even worse problems, I would say. So if you try to build these big global solutions that the whole company has to use, it can take a long time and block people while you're building it. When it is built, it might not do the things the team actually need it to do. It might stop them, and it might actually slow teams down more than actually if they built something themselves. So it's always a very difficult trade-off. And I don't really have a perfect answer or something that to make this easier. I do think it's good to try and think about things early. So when you're starting out on your modernization journey, just think about what could be something that needs to be globalized and make sure it's on your radar. And as you're going through modernization, always be thinking about, yeah, what might become a topic that becomes more global later, or what feels like it's becoming more global. And one of the things I think PayFit does really well is PayFit built this internal, I will call it a platform. It's a few different things all under one umbrella, but basically it provides a standardized way for any team building any new application to interact with the legacy system in both directions. So let's say I want to build a new feature and I need to get in a modernized application and I want to get something and I want to get some data out of the legacy system. Well, it doesn't currently have an API. I can't go directly to the legacy system database. So I can use a legacy platform to publish an event when certain actions happen in the legacy system, and I can consume those events in my modernized application. And I can do things in the opposite direction. So if I'm building some new feature, which let's say I'm building a new feature and it allows you to add an avatar to your employee so they can add pictures of themselves. That's not a real example. Couldn't think of anything more interesting. But once these pictures are uploaded, they need to be stored in a legacy system, for example. Probably wouldn't make sense in that case, but the idea is you build a new feature, you get some new data, and it has to go back into the legacy system so that both systems know about this new record that's being created in your system. The platform allows you to do that as well. I would say very easily, and there are multiple benefits here. The first one is any team doesn't have to worry about how do I get data in or out of the legacy. We have this standardized way of doing things. It's well documented. There's lots of examples. We have a team that knows how this works. Another benefit is because it was built in-house, it can be evolved based on the challenges PayFit is facing, and it does evolve on a regular basis. And another benefit is obviously teams don't have to spend any time on this, building their own custom solution. It's there out of the box already. So to me, this is something that's very often a good global solution. Thinking this, how do your new and your old software talk to each other? Having lots of bespoke ways of doing that is usually not a good idea. So I think that's quite a good global topic. That's the kind of thing to look for when you're starting out, I would say. But like I was saying, sometimes it's better to start local, I think. It's sometimes too early to think about global. It makes a lot of sense to start locally. It makes sense to say, team A and team B, you can both solve this problem however you want to in your own unique way. We don't think it's a global problem yet. And this can happen organically as well, because teams often tend to become silos focused on their problems, and they might not realize, or they might not feel like, I'm going to reach out to this other team and see if we should do this together. In some companies, it's just not. Teams are very siloed. So what the problem here becomes is a problem starts local, but then you need to have some mechanism in place where someone in your company says, hey, this is now a topic that needs to be addressed globally. We've got the same thing, same problem, same solution happening in 2, 3, 4 places. And we know that 5 other teams are going to need something similar in the future. Now is the time to globalize. And that's, I find, the hardest bit, changing the direction, whether something started global or local, and it needs to go in the opposite direction, stepping in at that point and just saying, we need to change the approach now. That can be the difficult bit because everyone's already focused on their objectives, their roadmap, and they're moving, and they're not really wanting to like, oh, let's zoom out, let's rethink this whole thing. That's scary for a lot of people. So I'll share some of the things that work at PayFit, not everything, but 2 of the things I think work really well. So we have the staff engineering community, and straight off the bat, the staff engineering community has the objective of driving this modernization work in the company across the whole company. So we meet every 2 weeks. We have 2 different subgroups, but we're all friends. It's just different meetings with different topics. And this is one of the ideas. One of the questions is, what problems are you solving in the tribe you're working in? Are there any chances that we should be doing something on a more global basis here? And the second thing that PayFit does really well is we have these regular I/O conferences. It's basically an internal conference. It lasts for about half a day, a bit like this conference, actually. Imagine this conference was just happening in your company. You have these speakers talking about different topics throughout the day. And the benefit of these is different teams can share knowledge about what they're working on. and you don't rely on your staff engineers to do all this dot connecting. You try and create a space where the teams can learn from each other. Um, and we see a lot of cases where that does happen, where team A solved a really interesting problem, and team B or team C is like, oh, I didn't know that was possible, or oh, we have that problem, and we could talk about this, about solving this together. So I think those are two of the great approaches. And again, just to finish this topic, I would say when you're starting out on modernization, you can have this constant ongoing topic of local versus global decisions. Could be about libraries, about solutions. It can be on different topics about this local, global nature. And who are the people? I think the most important thing is who are the people who will step in at some point and say, we need to do things in a different way here. The local approach has been working, but now we have to go global. I find that is the real important skill to try and have in your team and your company. Otherwise, yeah, you might go too far in the local direction. All right, so that's basically it. Just quickly reminder, in my experiences, modernization is hard technical problems and hard organizational problems. If someone says it's one or the other, then they're wrong. Um, and I would say three takeaways. Who are your Christinas? Who are the people who will keep this constant skills, knowledge, and application ongoing on a regular basis? Who will be this heartbeat in your company? The people who will keep that opportunities there, keep it moving forward. She's been doing it for like almost 3 years now, so she's not giving up on this. She's really in it for the complete journey. She's doing an amazing job. Second question: who are your decision facilitators? There are going to be lots of decisions, and if you don't spot them early and have a good process for making decisions, you're going to get blocked a lot, I think. And then who are your cross-domain pollinators? Who are the people that will identify that a local problem is now becoming a global problem, and we need to do something that's on a more global basis to solve that problem? And that is everything. Here are the ways you can keep in touch with me.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Michelle. Questions? We got a few minutes here. Questions for Nick? Maybe a quick question, Nick, from my perspective. What I see a lot of times is a lot of like agile coaches, change agents struggle to understand the technical side, and I think I've seen that more recently. What do you do, or what do you suggest for somebody that doesn't have technical background? But when we look at the whole ecosystem, we talked about systems thinking today, and you talked about globally versus locally, big picture, small picture. What would you recommend for people that may not be as familiar with the architecture and development side of all the things?
Yeah, so I think if you look at my three takeaways here,
Yeah.
I think there is a huge element of coaching skills in all of those coaching, facilitation skills. A lot of times, the people who are very strong technically don't have the skills that are needed to enable these three kinds of roles to happen, and so they need to be supported. So, um, trying to think of some good examples, I would say, yeah, a while ago I was talking to this architecture team, and they were given this job of leading modernization, but I don't really think they had many of the skills I'm talking about here. Very good technically, very nice people, but just lacking in this concept of I need to manage the organization, I need to work people, I need to own this decision-making process. And they had a project manager who was in their team. They weren't treating modernization like a project, but in terms of having some priorities, how to focus, the rituals to organize, I think those skills were very needed. And then in a lot of my examples over the past year, we need a lot of coaching in the team. Uh, we have a lot of retrospectives, always trying to think about how can we improve what's happened before.
Yeah.
It's an ongoing learning journey. So, someone who's not technical can still have a huge impact, even if they don't have technical skills. If you do want to have technical skills as well, like the decision-making process, that is where a coach can have a huge impact, I would say, because I just see so often that decisions get stuck. People have been talking about problems for months or years, and no one's ever solved it because Team A says it should be this way, Team B says it should be this way. No one can ever agree on how it should work, so it never gets done till it becomes a real problem. But if someone wanted to be more technical, I think I think it's quite interesting nowadays because with things like Copilot, that can explain a lot of things to you, even if you don't understand code. Like you can say to Copilot, "What the hell is this code doing?" Like
Yeah.
I have to use Copilot to understand other people's code sometimes. Like, what the hell is this code doing? Can you rewrite this code in a way that I can understand it? Because I've been trying for an hour now and I don't know what this previous person was trying to explain with this code. Nothing personal. I was exaggerating a bit. So I think Copilot's really interesting. Yeah, if you ever got a technical question and
Yeah.
you're allowed to feed your company data to Copilot, you can always try it there first. Like, what does this concept represent? Explain this to me as though I'm not a developer.
Yeah.
That can be super interesting. And I think when it comes to domain-driven design as well, I'll just try and go back to one of the previous slides. I think these kind of concepts here, when we talk about this kind of map, is more on a business level. This is really how your business works, how the different, if you imagine that your business is a conceptual model, how do these different concepts relate to each other? I think that doesn't really require any technical skills. It's really about looking at your product, figuring out how the product works, your business process works.
Yeah.
And I think also, I think I think event-driven architecture is something that I see. I don't know if non-technical people I see people like product managers who get this concept quite quickly because with event-driven architecture, yes, it's technical, but it's really on a business level. We have these different bits of software that represent different parts of our business, and
Hmm.
they communicate via events, which are things happening in our business. So like employee joined the company or employee had a pay rise. Like the technical bit here is only half the story. And I think a lot of people can grasp these concepts quite quickly. So I think, yeah, event-driven architecture, if that's something your company's doing, that can is something you can learn quickly.
Which is
Really
not,
think,
that's kind of my point. Like a lot of, at least, and I know we're out of time, but maybe this is a separate, like, how do we bridge a gap? Because I work with a lot of business people, and I work with a lot of their companies not doing, they have, like you're, described here, a lot of them are trying to modernize, but they just feel, when I talk to them and they open up, they're intimidated by this stuff. So how, in what ways could we encourage people to bridge that gap? But that might be and it is topic for a different time, because I think we could spend a lot on it. But that's a challenge that I see. So any thoughts? Any final takeaways? Anybody want to share what was their biggest takeaway today, or anything before we wrap it up here? Nick, thank you. Before we close it up, thank you so much again. For a lot of
thank
you,
you.
it's late. Thank you for taking the time and being part of this conference. Um, I really appreciate it. Anybody want to share biggest takeaway from today's, or anything? Any other question?
I think we have a lot of new people to follow, and I learned so much today. I'm going to be getting free books and signing up for podcasts, and the learning continues. So I'm really grateful for you to put this together for us. And really, at the only cost is our time, but I think it's just a great investment in the half day. And I look forward to future programs that you put out. So thank you so much, really. And the presenters were really awesome.
Thank you. Thank you, Patricia.